Can you guys hear me? I hope you can. Guess I didn't check my mic settings. Yeah, I think it should be right. Look on my dresser right there. Is that it? All right. All right, can you guys hear me? Thump, thump, thump. Is that working? All right. Good to see everybody. It's been a busy day, so I thought maybe we'd do some framing. We'll do that one of these days, but probably not tonight. I'm too tired. But we'll do some bathroom work one of these days while you guys want to watch that. We ready to start on Matthew 27? What are we at? We'll give a couple seconds here for people to join up and get going. Yeah, there's no closed captioning because I have to have it on a 30-second delay in order to have the closed captioning, and then it doesn't work very well for people asking questions. And when they ask a question and 30 seconds later they get an answer, it gets a little disjointed and confusing. Yep, ma'am. You tell her she's deaf, and so she doesn't see when I'm saying something. So, okay, we're going to be in Matthew 27, and I think I got the description fixed with the links. So if you guys want to follow along, there's links in the description to it's actually not a 1984. It's a few years later, but it's really close to the one we'll be using here. I haven't found an online one that has exactly... Well, there is one, but it's a PDF form, and it's not very easy for pulling up on your web browser. So, I got it, huh? All right, well, I'm hoping. Okay. What are we at? 64. I usually wait till about 100 people are here. We'll give a couple more minutes. I know I started late, but a bunch of weird stuff was going on. Preach it. Rachel's the one that reminded me that we had that I had the description wrong on the notes. It didn't have the links in there for like weeks and weeks. So there's also a place there you can get an audio Bible there and download an audio Bible. I think that's one of the keys to life. The best thing that ever did for my family was start playing the audio Bible nonstop in our house, 24/7. What does the Greek in the thumbnail say? Ah, very good. I was wondering if anybody was ever going to ask that. Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is near. So if you can sum up Jesus' whole ministry with that message. That's like what he preached about the kingdom more than anything else. Of course, he died on the cross for our sins, but that's what ushered in the power of the kingdom. So anyways, that was the gospel. That's the gospel according to Jesus. Preaching this gospel, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is near. So that's awesome. All right. Well, I think, that's still only 67. We'll continue on here and let people join up as we go. So we're in Matthew 27, and there Jesus has just been on trial, and we're going to continue on. So here we go.
Matthew 27. Early in the morning, all the chief priests and the elders of the people came to the decision to put Jesus to death. They bound him, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate, the governor. When Judas, who had betrayed him, saw that Jesus was condemned, he was seized with remorse and returned the 30 silver coins to the chief priests and the elders.
"I have sinned,"
he said,
"for I have betrayed innocent blood."
"What is that to us?"
they replied.
"That's your responsibility."
So Judas threw the money into the temple and left. Then he went away and hanged himself. The chief priests picked up the coins and said,
"It is against the law to put this into the treasury, since it is blood money."
So they decided to use the money to buy the potter's field as a burial place for foreigners. That is why it has been called the field of blood to this day. Then what was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled.
They took the 30 silver coins, the price set on him by the people of Israel, and they used them to buy the potter's field, as the Lord commanded me.
Meanwhile, Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him,
"Are you the king of the Jews?"
"Yes, it is as you say,"
Jesus replied. When he was accused by the chief priests and the elders, he gave no answer. Then Pilate asked him,
"Don't you hear the testimony they are bringing against you?"
but Jesus made no reply, not even to a single charge, to the great amazement of the governor. Now it was the governor's custom at the feast to release a prisoner chosen by the crowd. At that time they had a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So when the crowd had gathered, Pilate asked them,
"Which one do you want me to release to you? Barabbas or Jesus, who is called Christ?"
For he knew it was out of envy that they had handed Jesus over to him. While Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat, his wife sent him this message.
Don't have anything to do with that innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him.
But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus executed.
"Which of the two do you want me to release to you?"
asked the governor.
Barabbas!
They answered.
"What shall I do then with Jesus, who is called Christ?"
Pilate asked. They all answered,
Crucify him!
"Why? What crime has he committed?"
asked Pilate, but they shouted all the louder.
Crucify him!
When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that instead an uproar was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd.
"I am innocent of this man's blood,"
he said.
"It is your responsibility."
All the people answered,
Let his blood be on us and on our children!
Then he released Barabbas to them, but he had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. Then the governor's soldiers took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole company of soldiers around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on his head. They put a staff in his right hand and knelt in front of him and mocked him.
"Hail, King of the Jews!"
they said. They spit on him and took the staff and struck him on the head again and again. After they had mocked him, they took off the robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him away to crucify him. As they were going out, they met a man from Cyrene named Simon, and they forced him to carry the cross. They came to a place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. There they offered Jesus wine to drink mixed with gall, but after tasting it, he refused to drink it. When they had crucified him, they divided up his clothes by casting lots, and sitting down, they kept watch over him there. Above his head they placed the written charge against him. This is Jesus, the King of the Jews. 2 robbers were crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads and saying,
You who are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself! Come down from the cross if you are the Son of God.
In the same way, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders mocked him.
He saved others,
They said,
but he can't save himself. He's the King of Israel. Let him come down now from the cross, and we will believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God rescue him now if he wants him, for he said, I am the Son of God.
In the same way, the robbers who were crucified with him also heaped insults on him. From the 6th hour until the 9th hour, darkness came over all the land. About the 9th hour, Jesus cried out in a loud voice,
Eloi,
Eloi, lama sabachthani.
Which means,
My God, why have you forsaken me?
when some of those standing there heard this, they said,
He's calling Elijah.
Immediately one of them ran and got a sponge. He filled it with wine vinegar, put it on a stick, and offered it to Jesus to drink. The rest said,
Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to save him.
And when Jesus had cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook and the rocks split. The tombs broke open and the bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs, and after Jesus' resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many people. When the centurion and those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and all that had happened, they were terrified and exclaimed,
Surely he was the Son of God.
Many women were there, watching from a distance. They had followed Jesus from Galilee to care for his needs. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary, the mother of James and Joses, and the mother of Zebedee's sons. As evening approached, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who had himself become a disciple of Jesus. Going to Pilate, he asked for Jesus' body, and Pilate ordered that it be given to him. Joseph took the body, wrapped it in a clean linen cloth, and placed it in his own new tomb that he had cut out of the rock. He rolled a big stone in front of the entrance to the tomb and went away. Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were sitting there opposite the tomb. The next day, the one after Preparation Day, the chief priests and the Pharisees went to Pilate.
Sir,
they said,
we remember that while he was still alive, that deceiver said, After 3 days I will rise again. So give the order for the tomb to be made secure until the 3rd day. Otherwise, his disciples may come and steal the body and tell the people that he has been raised from the dead. This last deception will be worse than the first.
Take a guard,
Pilate answered.
Go make the tomb as secure as you know how.
So they went and made the tomb secure by putting a seal on the stone and posting the guard. Matthew 28. After the Sabbath.
Sure. All right, there we go. So, 27. Man, these last few chapters just got a ton of verses, don't they? All right, so the story you've all probably heard before. Let's kind of go through it again here and see what it sticks out to us as we continue going through. So they bind him and hand him to Pilate. I always think about this part of Judas. I think I shared this last time, but it says Judas, who had betrayed him, when he saw that Jesus was condemned, he was seized with remorse. He wasn't remorseful until he saw Jesus was condemned. And I really think it's because he perfectly thought, Jesus had escaped so many times. You know, baby girl.
Can we have a big cup of water?
Give me a big cup of water.
Can I get one with Claudia too?
Yep, I will in just a little bit, okay? Okay, sorry about that. So anyways, Jesus had already escaped how many times? There's time they picked him up to stone him, and he disappeared into the crowd, it says. One part says he walked right through them. The other one says that he disappeared into the crowd. I couldn't find him. He miraculously gets away all these times somehow. And I'm pretty sure Judas just thought he was going to be making money. He was the guy who had the money bag, and he used to steal out of the treasury that they had. It says in other gospel. So I really think he was just trying to make money off of Jesus' inability to get caught. And I'm sure he thought he was doing a good thing. That, Jesus never gets caught, so how about I make some money off of this? I'll let them pay me, he'll get away, and I'll make 30 silver. And but here he sees, once he's realized that Jesus is being condemned, then he's remorseful. And he takes the 30 silver coins to the chief priest, and he throws it in there. I have betrayed innocent blood. He said he's innocent. What is that to us? That is your responsibility. I mean, Jesus had already said of Judas that it'd be better for him if he had never been born. So this is it's a pretty bad deal. So there's a little bit of discrepancy here with some of the other gospel accounts. It says, I think it's in Acts, I think. Judas threw the money into the temple and left. He went away and hanged himself. One of the other gospels, it says he hanged himself and his body fell headlong and all his intestines fell out, and that's why they call it the field of blood. This one says it was the field of blood because they bought the field to bury foreigners in it, which is just interesting. This is something I want to talk about again. We've kind of mentioned before about the prophetic stuff. You didn't remember that the silver was used to buy a burial place? Yeah, that's what they did with it. I find it's funny that they say this is against the law for us to put it into the treasury because it's blood money. I mean, there's no law against that. I mean, maybe that was their own tradition law. I mean, there's nothing in the Bible that says you can't use blood money in the treasury. So I'm always interested where they got that from. But oh yeah, this part here about being spoken by Jeremiah the prophet. So we've shared before about Jesus's life. I think it can be shown in his account here in the Gospels that his life, Israel's life, was prophetic of what Jesus would do. They sacrificed the Passover lamb, and Jesus didn't come saying, "Hey, remember when I did the Passover lamb? I want to come and send Jesus just like the Passover lamb." It wasn't like that. It was always Jesus that always saved them. Jesus didn't die like the Passover lamb. He was already the Passover lamb, borrowing into the future. And in Israel's life, remember it said that when Herod was going to kill all the babies 2 and under, it says, "Take the child to Egypt and wait till the death of Herod." And then it says, "So what was fulfilled from the spoken out of the prophet, out of Egypt I called my son," which is from Hosea. But if you go back and read Hosea 11, where that prophecy comes from, that prophecy isn't about Jesus. It's about Israel being led out of Egypt, back when Moses led them out. And it's not about that at all, but it was being declared fulfilled in the Gospels. And I think this is the same kind of a thing. So let's look back at that real fast here. Matthew 27. There it is. Jeremiah 32. So Jeremiah said, "The word of the Lord came to me. Hananiel, son of Shalaim, your uncle, is going to come to you and say, 'Buy my field at Anathoth, because you're my nearest relative. It is your right to buy it.'" So that's the part that it's saying is fulfilled. But if you go through this, it had a whole meaning to them then. I mean, that was a real thing. For this is what the Lord Almighty said, "Vineyards again will once be bought in the land." This original prophecy is about Israel going back to the land again, which is why he told them to go buy this field. And that's what happened. Israel was brought back into the land. But this in Matthew here is saying, all that is being, what did I do? There we go. That this is fulfilling that. When Jesus takes the 30 pieces of silver and they buy the potter's field, and talking about what happened with Judas, he's saying that's what that prophecy was about, but that's not really what it was about. And so we have to change our mind, our thinking about what a prophecy is and what its point was. And Israel's whole life is a prophecy. And so I've shared before about how Israel wandered the wilderness for 40 years, and Jesus wandered the wilderness for 40 days, fasting, being tempted by the devil. And Israel's called the vine. Jesus says, "I'm the vine." Jesus is the lamb, or Israel, sacrificed the lamb. Jesus was that lamb. And over again, these kinds of prophecies are being fulfilled. Even right when we get a minute ago here, when David says, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Or Jesus says, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And then you go back and read that, where that came from. That was just David. When he was being betrayed and his enemies were against him, he said that. And somehow his life was again prophetic. That's why they call what Jesus was supposed to be the son of David. And have the throne of Jesus. That's why the Jews missed his coming, because they were expecting a literal king. But All right, so yeah, I just think that's interesting. So we have it specifically. Then what was fulfilled, what was spoken of the prophet Jeremiah. So I just think that's a really good key for understanding what things that Jesus did when he came. So then Pilate says, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Man, I'm not so much different than the audio Bible that I've been following. Are you the king of the Jews? Yes, it is as you say. I find it's funny that in one of the Gospels it fleshes it out more, and they ask him, they tell him, he says he's a king. You're a king of the Jews? And he's like, yeah, I am. I mean, wouldn't that seem crazy to him? I mean, how can he be the king of the Jews? And yet Pilate still wanted to let him go, which is amazing. But Jesus made no reply, not even to a single charge, to the great amazement of the governor. You can't be convicted if you don't say anything. And Jesus didn't defend himself because he knew he was supposed to die. And so I just think now we do that all the time. We stay quiet, but that was new stuff then. Now this part here, I think it's twisted around. Maybe we'd think about it a little bit differently here. About the fact that now there was a governor's custom at the feast of release a prisoner chosen by the crowd. And so it was a custom. I mean, they did this every year. So the governor allowed one person who was in prison of the Jews to be released at their choosing. And so they usually paint this picture of Barabbas is this insane, murdering, terrible, terrible dude who they chose this wicked murderer instead of Jesus. And there's some truth to that, but it says that he was guilty of murder during the uprising. So there was a time apparently when the Jews rebelled against Rome, and they would have seen this guy as a hero, not as a murderer. And so, I mean, he was a murderer, but ultimately they probably have figured out for many years, okay, this guy is our buddy in jail, and they let someone go every year. So this year we're going to ask for this guy. Next year we're going to ask for this guy to be released. They probably had already had Barabbas on the docket to want to be released, and Pilate thought this would be a good opportunity maybe to release Jesus instead, because that's what he wanted to do. And so he says, how about which one do you want to release, Barabbas or Jesus who was called Christ? It says, for they knew it was out of envy. He wanted to release Jesus. He's looking for any opportunity, and he just saw this as a one more way for him to possibly let Jesus go. He tried 3 times to let Jesus go. And I always think about this lady, his wife in the dream. Don't have anything to do with that innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him. So imagine that. So this woman had a dream in which she was suffering enough where she had to go tell her husband, don't have anything to do with that guy. It's bad news. But then again, why would she have that dream? I mean, it was God's will for Jesus to die on the cross, right? God wasn't going to allow it to be prevented. Jesus wasn't going to allow it to be prevented. He was going to do his Father's will. He was going to die on the cross. And yet this woman had a dream that must have been there by God, right? I mean, why else would she have this dream? She didn't say, she tried to tell her husband to let him go. Don't have anything to do with that guy. I just think that's an interesting thing that happened. And of course we have it so we can read it in the story here, but chief priests and elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and have Jesus executed. What shall I do then with Jesus who is called Christ? Again, why are they asking? They've already been saying they wanted to be put to death and executed, condemned. He already knew what they wanted him to do, but he asked them again, what do you want me to do with this guy? And he wants them to say it. He wants them to be on the hook for this and not him. And you'll see that here with the washing of the hands. When Pilate saw he was getting nowhere, but instead uproar was starting, he took water, washed his hands in front of the crowd. I am innocent of this man's blood. He is your responsibility. I don't know what that's supposed to do. He's still the one who condemned him. If you go back in Luke, it says, if the ones who handed me over to you are guilty of a greater sin. So Jesus says to Pilate, I know that you only have authority because of what God has given you. God put you in authority. That's the only reason why you have power over me. So the people that handed me over to you, they're the real evil people, Jesus says. And so Jesus is even nice to Pilate here and knows that he wasn't quite on the hook. So Pilate wouldn't be involved. He'd be completely the Pharisees' fault. I absolutely, Princess Bubblegum, that's absolutely what I think it was supposed to do. At the time in this part of the 32 or 33 AD, there was already great animosity between the Jews and Rome. They were in Jerusalem. Jerusalem was traditionally ruled by who? By Israel. But now it was under Roman occupation and had been, and they didn't like them there. They hated each other. They fought back and forth, and so yet the Romans tried to maintain peace. And the Romans a lot of times looked on as bad guys, but a lot of times they were just trying to maintain the peace. But yeah, he definitely was trying to pass the buck. I don't think it's totally passed, but this part here, I always think about this line, in The Passion of the Christ, when Mel Gibson made that movie. This line was in it. Let his blood be on us and on our children. But Jewish people got really upset and got him to take it out. So that never appeared in the movie. But that's pretty damning there. That's a very convicting statement. Let his blood be on us and on our children. That's like they're taking total ownership for what's happening here. They released Barabbas, but then he has Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. It wasn't with Mel Gibson. As Mel Gibson made it. It's called The Passion of the Christ. It's just a story about Jesus being crucified. It's super bloody. I still think it's good. You should watch it. But it's a little over the top in the violence category. But it's Jesus, so that's all right. So they took Jesus to the Praetorium. That's the place where the guard goes. They're like the police. Gathered the whole company of soldiers around him. They stripped him, put a scarlet robe on him. They're mocking him. Crown of thorns. Hail, King of the Jews. They spit on him, take the staff and mock him. It doesn't have anything here about them sending him to Herod. But in the middle of all this, they put the robe on him, and right after they put the robe and they mock him, they send him off to Herod because, again, Pilate wanted no piece of this. And so he's like, he's not part of my jurisdiction. He's from Galilee? Oh, man, that's Herod's territory. Go to Herod. See you later, Jesus. And he thinks he's off the hook now. I don't have to put him to death because Herod can take care of it. It's his responsibility. But then Herod sees him and wants to see a miracle. Jesus doesn't do a miracle for him and sends him back to Pilate. And it says in Luke that they became friends because of this, when previously they had been enemies. So they send him back, and so now Pilate's back on the hook for whatever reason. Now he's still his responsibility to put him to death. But then we have the part about Simon forcing Simon from Cyrene to carry his cross. And in other Gospels, it says that Jesus carried his cross. And so there's a little bit of difference there. I'm not concerned about that. Don't really know exactly what happened and why this man Simon is mentioned or what the purpose is in us knowing that. But again, the people that wrote this, Levi, Matthew, who wrote this, wasn't writing it for our benefit, 2,000 years later. It was writing for the people of that time so they would know that maybe this guy was someone everybody knew at that point. So they go to Golgotha, and again, Golgotha is Aramaic. It's not Hebrew. It means a place of the skull. For Jesus, wine to drink mixed with gall. Gall would be something to numb the pain. So after Jesus tasted it, he refuses to drink it. He didn't want to have the pain numbed. I think that's an interesting thought. Yeah, it probably was more of a mocking. The sign. So I thought about this a lot. They divided up his clothes by casting lots. In one of the other Gospels, it talks about Jesus had a one-piece undergarment, all one sewn piece. Is a very, very high-end kind of a fancy garment. And there's a lot of people that made a lot of hay over sacred underwear in a lot of religions and sects will try to make this be something that is important. Jesus, you have to wear whatever this is, and I just think it's important to say the only reason why we're mentioning it is because there is a place in the Old Testament where it said that they would cast lots for my clothing. That's what's mainly telling us here. It's not to tell us about this special underwear Jesus had. Above his head, they placed a written charge against him. And so the reason why this is interesting is that it's this that where we get the idea that Jesus died on a lowercase t cross with the stuff at the top. And traditionally, I mean, the Romans would crucify people. They crucified people throughout the Roman Empire. Crucifixion was nothing normal, nothing new, probably nothing normal either. But a lot of times the crosses were X's, and they would put people, spread out on them. Sometimes they were an uppercase T, and or just a stick in the ground, and they just nailed them to a single pole. And so a cross was not always lowercase t cross that you see. But it says whenever talks about the sign that the sign was put over him. And so it's because of that, I think, that they get the lowercase t, because there was somewhere to nail it. So, but maybe you can imagine another configuration where it could be a different kind of a cross. I always wondered where we get the idea that the cross was a lowercase t cross, and that's what we've grown to accept as the symbol. But, yeah. I don't know how you have a symbol of his resurrection. I'd rather have that than the symbol of the cross, but cross works, doesn't it? Endured the special underwear is a fulfillment of prophecy. Well, Sue, I'm not sure. Are you LDS? But maybe I don't know where you see that. I don't see any fulfillment of prophecy. There's nowhere I see anywhere that there's a special undergarment that Jesus wears. There's nowhere in the Old Testament anywhere that says anything about that. It does say they cast lots for his clothing. That's the only place that mentions anything like that. And in reality, it wasn't talking about Jesus anyway, so it's talking about that particular prophet. But if you have a verse that tells me that he was in fulfillment of prophecy, I'm very interested to know what verse you get that from. Two robbers were crucified with him, one on his right, one on his left. Oh, the sign. I don't know where my sign is. My sign isn't there and where I got this from, but Jesus of Nazareth. I can't remember what it actually says. Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. I can't remember. But that's one of the things I always like to bring apart the differences in the gospel accounts. I think we need to be aware of the differences. It's okay that there's differences. If four different guys write down the same story from four different angles, that happens. There are going to be some minor differences. That doesn't mean it didn't happen. Doesn't mean God's not true. Doesn't mean the Bible's not true. It actually makes it more true. And I think it's just important to be aware of these things, because both atheists and other religions, Islam and a few others, make a lot of hay over the fact that your God's supposed to be perfect, but the Bible's full of contradictions, and so your God can't write a book. He's clearly not God. And I think we need to embrace these things and realize that these were fishermen who are help to remember things that happened, and if they saw the story a little bit differently or remember things differently, that's okay. And one of them is the sign over his head. So the sign over Jesus' head is mentioned in all four Gospels, and all four Gospels worded a little differently. So what exactly did it say over his head? We don't know exactly word for word what it says. We don't need to know word for word what it says. Essentially, the gist was, this is Jesus, the King of the Jews. It was a sign in mocking, and in one place that the Pharisees get angry. He says, don't write the King of the Jews, but only write that this man said and claimed to be the King of the Jews. They didn't want it even said there because they thought it gave him credibility. And Pilate says, I'm not changing that. That's what I wrote. I'm going to leave it there. So, there's Catholic, that Jesus' clothes had no seams or a miracle themselves because of that. I've heard similar things, Marissa. That's kind of why I brought it up with the sacred underwear comment. It says in the Gospels that it was one garment. It was one piece, woven from one piece of fabric. So I don't think that means it had no seams. It just meant that it wasn't several pieces of fabric all together. It was made out of one giant piece of fabric. So it was valuable. It wasn't impossible. I don't see anywhere that it says that it was a miracle itself. Jesus was a miracle, and I think it's important to remember that fact, that what Jesus did on the cross is the miracle that he did for us. Rising from the dead, that's the miracle. And all these other things, in Eusebius, who was a church historian who wrote in like 400 something, 300 into the 4th century. He wrote that supposedly people who had the pieces of the cross, they had pieces of it and they all got carried away in talismans, and I think that's a bad idea. The cross isn't. It's just what killed Jesus. The miracle is who was on it and why he was on it and what he did for us in buying our freedom from our sins. That's the important thing. None of these other man-made implements are, his underwear or whatever, his undergarment. It's just not important. What Bible are you reading from? This is a 1984 NIV, Nicole. It's not produced anymore. And our audio Bible is in that one, and I like it, but it's not around anymore. So, as someone who doesn't follow religion but follow Christ, I feel interesting that the way we were told things like miracle clothes would wow us as children. I think that's the point. That's the point. Because man a lot of times feels like the story's not exciting enough on its own. We need to add all kinds of little embellishments. And I have a running tally of, I might even add yours to it. I wish I could track that down to an official quote from somebody, from people that say things like that. Like David, you may have heard David say, David took 5 smooth stones from the river because Goliath had 4 brothers. And there's a place where Goliath had 4 brothers in the Bible. And so that's what it is, because David, the implication is David was going to go kill Goliath's whole family. But it doesn't say that. That's silliness. And in fact, it robs the reality of the situation that David grabbed 5 smooth stones because he thought he might miss. And he didn't want to miss. And so he was just being wise and smart. And so there's all kinds of little legends like that all throughout the Bible that people have to add these embellishments into it because the original story isn't exciting enough. We got to give you some new stuff because you've heard the story of Jesus dying on the cross before. I got to tell you some new stuff. And that's the thing we remember. We remember miracle scenes, miracle underwear, and instead of getting down to the raw nitty-gritty of the story. A good time to ask this, Tom. Do you think people idolize the cross? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think they mean what it stands for. I think symbols are okay. I think no one would actually say they idolize the cross. But I do think we have a tendency, in the Old Testament, it says that they worship the sun, moon, and the stars a lot because, they were amazing. And God made those. God made those things. He made them good. They are amazing and beautiful. That doesn't mean they're worthy of worship. And it's the same way with the Word of God even. I mean, we should worship God, not even His words. That's why I'm a big fan of saying that it's okay for the Bible to have these minor inconsistencies. It's written by guys who might not have remembered it. God's perfect. You worship God. You don't worship this book that we have here. God's perfect. He's sovereign. He's all-powerful and almighty. He's worth all the glory. All this other stuff, I mean, they're all true stories. 100% true in the Bible. The Bible is all true. But if it says that John had a blue shirt, another one says John had a red shirt, I really don't care. It doesn't make any difference to the truth of what's happening in this story. So, boy, I kind of got off there on a little tangent. You are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days. Save yourself. Come down from the cross if you are the Son of God. This one here clearly says it's an insult. In one of the other Gospels, it says, you who did all these miracles and saved others, save yourself. Come down from the cross and we'll believe in you. And it's often told in a mocking way. But I think that there were people there that straight up wanted him to come down from the cross. They maybe were suspecting he was the Christ. And they thought, this is what we'll do. We can put him on the cross. And if he performs a miracle to come down because he's the Christ, we'll be able to see it and we'll be able to believe. And so I think there's definitely some of those there. And you can even see that here. There it is right there. He saved others, but he can't save himself. He's the King of Israel. Let him come down from the cross, and we will believe in him. They say it in a mocking tone, and it says they're mocking him, so I guess they were mocking him. But I think they would have believed him if he had come down. He trusts in God. Let God rescue him now if he wants him. You can see that here in verse 46. It says, he cried out, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? It says, when some of them standing there heard this, they said, he's calling Elijah. And they says, leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to save him. they were watching. They kind of wanted to see this exciting side. Maybe Elijah's going to come and save him. And Eli. So that's the same word for Elijah or Eli, Eloi, who's God. But what language is that quote in? That's Aramaic. All these quotes are Aramaic. So it's a little challenging because Hebrew and Aramaic are very similar. And so that's what allowed some people to think that they're still speaking Hebrew here. But there's several words like Gabbatha. There's a place called the Stone Pavement. That's where they went to have the trial for Jesus. Gabbatha doesn't exist at all in the Hebrew language. It's only Aramaic. And so, and there's a couple other words that are like that, which makes us realize that it was actually Aramaic that they were speaking. They were not speaking Hebrew. A lot of people insist that they were speaking Hebrew because the Jews today speak Hebrew, and they're Hebrews, right? So they must speak Hebrew, but they didn't. They didn't speak Hebrew. Hebrew was I can show, and I have shown before that language was lost almost entirely in Babylon and had to be relearned. And even now, there's parts of Hebrew they still don't quite understand what they mean because there's not any text they can reference some of the things from. So are these scrolls found written in Greek with the quotes in Aramaic? Exactly. That's the thing. They're transliterated. So that means transliterated means it's kind of like how in Spanish, hola, we would write. Well, I guess that still doesn't work. You write it with our language, our letters, in a way that it sounds in their language. So they phonetically sound it out in their language with the Greek alphabet, but words that are in Aramaic. That's what transliterated means, and so that's what they're saying, and that's what's important here, because I'll go here and say it here. Where were we at? We were in Matthew 27. Where were we at? 46. So you see the quote here. Jesus phone megale legon. So he said greatly. Eloi, it's right there. I can't click on it for you guys. This word right there. So that word is Eloi, lema sabachthani. So that's not a Greek word. Those aren't Greek words. There's no Greek word Eloi, lema sabachthani. Those aren't Greek words. They're transliterated. They are Aramaic words that they've now sounded out, which makes it the whole thing about whether or not it's in Hebrew or Greek. That's why some people will still try to hold that it's in Hebrew. A lot of people do. But if you actually look at the details, there's lots of words that are only in Aramaic that are used through here. So, good question. Past they realize he is in fact the Son of God. That must be an absolute question. Oh, for sure. So he said, leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to save him. It's kind of funny because maybe he did. I mean, I don't know, but Jesus gives up his spirit at this point. I mean, I wonder if we could have seen what was actually happening in the spirit world, if how that would work. I don't know, but I wonder what actually was transpiring there. But he gives up his spirit. People make a lot of hay with this verse here. Also, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and I've seen a whole bunch of people try to put a bunch of meaning in top to bottom, and obviously it must be God ripped it because man would have ripped it from the bottom to the top, and I don't think it makes any. I don't think there's a hidden meaning in there for that. I don't. It just says it was written from top to bottom. It's just a detail. That's how it ripped. He's given a detail, and I don't think we should try to put meaning in there, and maybe that's what it means. I don't think so. It's just a detail of how this went in the story, and it's the important thing is the curtain of the temple, right? The curtain is what separated the holy from holies. In their system, they called it the sea. The outer part was the sea. Beyond that was the land, earth. That's the place where the Gentiles were allowed to be. And the inner spot was a representation of heaven. That's where God is. That's where his throne is. And the Holy of Holies was where the Ark of his Covenant was at. And that's where God sat on the Ark of his Covenant. And when that curtain was torn, that veil between the two places, it is now, God's not there anymore. His place is now in our hearts. You can't go find him behind that curtain anymore. That's the whole meaning. And so Jesus is exactly Princess Bubblegum. Jesus was speaking Aramaic, but the account is written in Greek. It's all Greek. All of the words are Greek. They don't ever use a different alphabet, but they transliterate those words in there. Again, and that's another interesting point. If they spoke Aramaic and wrote Aramaic regularly, why did they just start writing it in Aramaic? Obviously, their audience was completely Greek. Why did they cast lots for his clothing? What's so special about it they would cast lots for it? It was just valuable. And in fact, I think it says that in one of the Gospels. Let's not tear it. Let's divide by lot who gets it. Because it was woven, it was sewn out of one piece, it was a high dollar item. That is strictly all it is. The Roman guards who were casting the lots for it, they could have cared less any kind of significance or value in the Hebrew people. They did not care in the slightest. They just knew that thing's worth some money. I want it. No, I want it. Well, okay, let's gamble for it. That's basically what it means. That's all it is. They were going to probably sell it. Why do you think he was calling out to Elijah? Because again, that word for God is very close to the word for Eli. Eloi, Eli, and if you didn't know better, it would be hard to tell. It's the same way you've heard Jesus and Joshua, Jesus. That's the same word. So the word for Jesus, Jesus, right here. Jesus is Hebrew origin. It's Jesus or Joshua. So that's the name. That's just the same name. There's no way to tell the difference between Jesus and Joshua. It's the same word, and so it's similar in this instance, that it's very same word, whether it's Elijah or God, and so. But I can understand that's obviously a confusing part too. Didn't know the other holy people that had died, risen from the dead. Oh yeah, the part from the tombs open up. The tombs broke open and the bodies of many people who were there were raised to life. They came out of the tombs, and after Jesus' resurrection, they went to the holy city and appeared to many people. In one place it says they appeared to 500 people. You think we're all going through what is stated in the Bible, worse than days of Noah? Nope, I do not, Yoshi. I actually have if you look in the description of this video, there's a mention, I have a little link there about preterism and my view on that kind of stuff, and you can watch that video if you're interested in my take on that. But I do not think. And besides, it doesn't actually say it will be worse than the days of Noah. That's actually a misquote. It says, "As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be at the coming of the Son of Man. For in the days before the flood, they were eating, drinking, marrying, and giving marriage up to the day Noah entered the ark, and the flood came and took them all away." That's the entire passage in question. And so what it's referring there, as it was in the day of Noah, it means that the people were just doing regular things, eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the flood came and took them away. They didn't know what was happening. It was sudden and unexpected. They were just living life, and all of a sudden the flood came and killed them. That's what it's meant to be. It doesn't say anywhere in the Bible that it's going to be super evil like it was in Noah's day. That's just not part of any scriptures at all. It's a myth, an old wives' tale. So all we know, anyways, the point, there's not a lot. This is the only place this is mentioned about the tombs breaking open. The many holy people died, raised to life. It's in I think it's in Mark, or maybe Luke. So it's in two of the Gospels. They don't mention anywhere else, and it's just one of those things like, that's interesting. And there are some prophecy things that you can try to tie it to, but I mean, we don't know if we're right or not. It's just interesting speculation. It obviously is a sign of a miracle. Some seriously good, it's powerful stuff was going on here. This is at his death, right? It wasn't even at his resurrection. At his death, this happened, which is interesting. Yeah, that's the earthquake, and it says they saw the earthquake and all that had happened. So it does say there's an earthquake. This is one of the quotes here. This is another point of contention between a couple of the Gospels. Surely he was the Son of God. In Luke, I think it says, surely he was a righteous man. So And again, I'm okay with the fact that it's different. I think the important thing is these Roman guards were a little taken aback by what happened here. Like, man, this guy was important for this to happen. Specifically what he said, I mean, I don't always feel the need. I heard some people say, well, probably one guard said, surely this is the Son of God. The other guy said, surely this was a righteous man. I just think it's, again, a telling of what happened. I don't know what the truth is of what actually was said. None of this is word for word anyways. It's an account. It's being told. And so that's okay. And I don't think we need to always try to reconcile every little difference. I think we need to embrace these things and just focus on what Jesus did for us and not all these little jots and tittles and things, and focus on the real story. Yeah, it is an unimportant detail as far as I'm concerned. He was the Son of God. And so, I mean, maybe he said that. I mean, it would have been unlikely. Most Romans are going to be serving the Greek gods, Zeus and all those dudes, and it's not likely that that was what was said. I wonder if there's a definite article there. I want to look at that real fast. In Greek, you use the definite article "the" on everything, whether or not it's a name or any other time. You would say like the Jesus went with the Peter to the Bethsaida. So, but you don't translate it that way because we don't speak that way in English. But it could, if it was there, it could be translated, surely he was a son of God. That could be if it was an indefinite article. Either way, I'm not really concerned with what he said. The point is these Roman guards are they're witnessing this happening and an earthquake and they're getting dark and all this stuff happening. They're like, man, this was a big deal. This guy died. Something different is happening here. Maybe they became believers. Certainly, and several of them did. There's several Roman guards during the times of Jesus or Paul in the Acts. During the Acts of the Apostles, that many Roman guards came to be Christians. Maybe they did. Maybe they became a believer. Maybe this is the beginning of it. I like to think that, but I mean, we don't know. It's just fun speculation. Well, thank you, Janet. Yep, thumbsing up is always very useful. Give us a thumbs up and subscribe and all that good stuff. Many women were there watching Jesus from a different distance. They followed Jesus to care for his needs. Among them are Mary, Magdalene, Mary, mother of James, mother of Zebedee's sons. And again, this is all just given details about people who were there. So these were all, at the time they wrote this, these people are still alive. I don't think for a second that Matthew, writing this, thought that his words were going to be on display 2,000 years from the time he wrote them. I don't think that at all. So he's just writing this account down because they're trying to get the message of Jesus out there. And nobody even knew who he was in a lot of cases. So they write this all down for posterity to aid their account. And of course, we have it well preserved, and we're very glad to have it. But that's why we get all these names. That we're supposed to know who those people are. They would have in those days, at least. How do you loop the Bible? Please. Thank you, Tom. I use an iPod, an old school iPod, for powering our audio Bible. We just got a speaker system that the iPod's hooked up to, and we just put it on repeat. So depending on which one you have, it may be a little different. So a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who will become a disciple of Jesus. He goes to Pilate, asks that he be given to him. He must have been a pretty important guy, right? So he's a rich guy. He probably had to bribe Pilate. He had to buy Jesus' body. And obviously Pilate would have known this guy was a sympathizer. And I think Pilate probably still felt bad. And so he's like, yeah, I'll give him to you. He placed it in his own new tomb that he had cut out of the rock, which would have been very expensive, a very fancy tomb they put Jesus in. And so then the next day, I find it very interesting that I enjoy this part a lot. That says, you remember while he was still alive, that deceiver said, after 3 days I will rise again. The Pharisees knew Jesus was going to rise. And yet the disciples forget. Right? You're going to see him walking on the road to Emmaus. Actually, you're not going to see it. It's only in Luke. But they're all like, man, what's more, we thought this guy was going to rise. We thought he was the Christ, and it's been 3 days since he died. It's like you think he'd remember what was going to happen in 3 days. He's going to rise again. The Pharisees knew he was supposed to rise again. So they knew very well what exactly was going on here. The blood is squarely on their hands. And I'd like to read this a little bit differently, and I don't have any proof for this, but Pilate gives the order to make the tomb secure. take a guard, make the tomb as secure as you know how. I think Pilate wanted this. He wants Jesus to rise. He would want nothing more. He was already very intrigued by Jesus and scared of Jesus. You can kind of tell from the other gospel accounts. I think he was like, he's going to rise. He told you he was going to rise from the dead. That's crazy. In fact, I'll give you guards. You'll put the seal on it. Let's wrap that up. Let's make it impossible for him to get out except by a miracle. Because I think Pilate wanted to see it. That's just my own personal thought. I don't have any information to back that up. But that's a good question, Vicky. If there's time, we can try to answer that after. I don't think it's related, but we can talk about that another time. Preparation day. There's a lot of weird stuff about the timing here. There's one verse that says, see, in one part Jesus says, like the prophet of Jonah, as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the huge fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. But if you figure out the exact days, he wasn't 3 days and 3 nights dead before he rose. And so exactly, it was like 2.5 days or 3 days, but 2 nights and stuff like that. And so there's some confusing language, and a lot of people are trying to figure out exactly what day he died on and exactly what day he rose on. And there's a lot of hot debates over that issue. And I don't know. And I personally don't even care. I just care that he did rise, and that like he said he would, and according to the prophetic text. So that's what I care about. But so there's one verse where it says, in the Greek, it says, after the Sabbath, as it began to dawn towards another Sabbath. And so there's a lot of topic about what this is. The preparation day would have been the day they got ready for the Sabbath. And then he rose then on the Sabbath. What was it the day? Was it Passover? Or there's just some confusion there. I can't say I know for sure what's going on. Okay, so this is probably it right here. After the Sabbath at dawn on the first day of the week. Let's look at that real fast. Matthew in the Greek. That's chapter 28, verse 1. I guess we'll get to that next week when we talk about that then. So I guess that's the end of the chapter. Go make the tomb as secure as you know how. I think Pilate really wanted to make it as secure as he could. Anything about him dying on Good Friday, the Friday before Easter in the Bible? No, there's no day of the weeks mentioned in the Bible. So there's Sabbaths. And so this verse we're going to see right here, 28, we'll talk about it next week. In the Greek, it actually is after the Sabbath at dawn, as it began to dawn towards another Sabbath. And so that's the problem here. I believe the NIV here has translated that correctly, at dawn on the first day of the week. So the thing there would have been, they're using Sabbath in the term they started counting the weeks, Sabbath to Sabbath. And so that was their marker. The Sabbath day was their holy day, and they said next Sabbath would have been a week's time. And so the idea is that they began to use the term Sabbath as the term for week. And so that's why they get this. But Alexa, stop. Oh my gosh. Stop. Ugh. Alexa, volume 0. Alexa, volume 0. Man, our Alexa, I tell you, will start playing music out of nowhere. What are your thoughts on the Shroud of Turin? Do you believe it's a hoax or a real? I don't know. All my life I thought it was a hoax, and I saw another scientist look at it, and maybe now it's real. I don't know. I think it's unimportant. It's a very fun piece of evidence and a nice artifact, but we don't need it to make it true, right? We want to believe by sight. We like to believe by sight. rather than by faith a lot of times, how wonderful it is to see a miracle. But if anything we learn from Jesus's time, just because you see a miracle doesn't make you a believer. The Pharisees saw all kinds of miracles. They saw Jesus raise Lazarus from the dead, and that didn't make them Christians. So I think those kinds of evidences, while fun and interesting, and if it's real, how exciting. But it's exciting that Jesus rose from the dead. It's not exciting that they found his clothes, even if they are his clothes. So I think that it's, I don't like to get distracted by all these holy artifacts. And I'm very interested in the history and the geography and the, all the archaeology that they're doing and unearthing things and things we can learn from that. I'm very excited. I like all that stuff. It's interesting. But, it's not exactly necessary, if that makes any sense. Why do you suppose we don't see those things today? Well, Hollyhock, we can have some good more talks about preterism if from the preterist perspective, it makes a lot of sense. Especially if you go back to the 70 weeks prophecy and the purpose of what these things would do and why Jesus poured out these gifts on the believers at the time. It was to confirm their message. After Jesus was about to be stoned, he says, I have shown you many great miracles from the Father. For which of these do you stone me? We are not stoning you for any of these, but for blasphemy. For you, a mere man, claim to be God. And so he says, well, if you don't believe me, at least believe in the evidence of the miracles themselves. So Jesus came with his message, the kingdom of heaven is near. That kingdom that you talked about, that in Daniel, the kingdom that's coming, God's kingdom, it's near, it's close. And that's a big, bold statement. And his miracles were to confirm what he did. He wasn't just healing a leper so that guy would not have leprosy and could be comfortable. I mean, no doubt he was, and no doubt that. But the point is he was who he said he was. Otherwise, why could he do these miracles? And if you look at all the things they said before when he was testifying before all the Pharisees, and when they were talking about him, this man is not from God, because he doesn't follow the Sabbath. Another one says, well, how can a man who's not from God do these miraculous signs? And so it was the fact that he was doing these miracles that were confirming his message. Otherwise, he would have just been a crazy man. And so it was these miracles that set them apart. So, all right. So, I guess we're done. So, do we want to go ahead and pray? Let's go ahead and pray, and we'll close out. So, dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this day and for these people who are here. I pray that their hearts will be softened to this message, and those here who perhaps don't know you would start to see these things as true and come to know you, Father. I pray you will give us the wisdom to be able to absorb these things the best we can and to focus on the things that matter and not to focus on the things that don't matter. I pray you'll help us this week, and I pray you'll help all this stuff with the viruses, that you'd help the people that are sick, to help them to get better, and that you'd help us all to stop panicking and just trust you, God, and continue going forward and take care of what's going on. Thank you for everything. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, guys. Well, I will see you later. I really appreciate it, and we'll see you next time.